Hello and welcome to another installment, episode 3 in fact, of Game vs Real, a series for those who are unfamiliar with it where we take a specific real-world car and then compare it to that vehicle, or as close to it as we can get, in a new racing game each week. So far we've had Forza Horizon 4, Test Drive Unlimited 2, and this week my favourite Forza game, Forza Motorsport 4. So the stakes are pretty high, but they're high for a second reason. Not only is it my favourite Forza game, but the car in question is from my favourite brand, Maserati. So for me it's a very personally important episode. And of course the car that I'm comparing it to in real life was my car. My second car in fact after the Touareg, a 2005 Maserati Quattroporte. Now I love many things about that car and I hated certain things about that car. It certainly wasn't the most reliable thing around, and in case you were wondering, no, I don't own it anymore. But as far as the episode breakdown goes, for those who are unfamiliar with it, we basically take the car, compare it to the game, and then score it in 3 specific ways. The accuracy of the specs, which is very easy to double check. The second thing is the realism. Does the steering and the handling feel like the real car, or at least as close to it as a game reasonably can? And then the third and arguably most important thing is the fun factor. Does the game manage to put across, again as much as a video game can, the kind of fun that you can have in that vehicle? Does it feel like it has the character and the personality of the car within the confines of the game and its physics? And before we go on into the meat of the episode, it is very, very important for me to point out that on this occasion, this is the biggest difference between the two vehicles, the one in the game and the one in real life. And that is very important to say because in episode 1, it was literally exactly the same car. The BMW is the same in the game as real life. The second episode was a little bit further apart. My Touareg is an 06, the one in the game is a facelifted 07. The reason why it was still passable though is because the Touareg didn't really change that much with the facelift. It really was just that. This one though is different, because the car in the game is from 2011, mine from 2005. 6 years difference, but it's more important than just the age. This is a newer generation of car, and there's one very significant difference between the two, which I'm going to get into later on in the video, and it is going to affect my scores. And the simple reason why I'm mentioning all of this is because this might be the episode that I actually revisit the most in future if I do ever drive the exact Maserati that's in the game to redo my scores. But at the end of the day, as I've said before, this particular series is less about measuring every single millimeter diameter of each wheel nut and comparing the tyre tread and trying to be as nerdy as possible. It's more about the fun of it, so you can still compare the car and have a rough idea of, does the game feel good enough, or is it great? So with that in mind, let's get into our first category. And the first one, as I said, is the accuracy. Are the specs, the horsepower, the weight, all that kind of stuff accurate to real life? And before you jump down to the comments and say, well, surely that's not fair to compare the specs of a 2011 car to yours, well, that's not what I'm doing. Of course not. I'm comparing the specs of the car in the game to the real life specs of that same car, not my car. And interestingly, it's a good start for Forza, because it's a 5 out of 5 from me. The specs are spot on. The power, the torque, the engine size, the weight, and even the weight distribution are spot on to real life. 4.7 litre V8, which is larger than mine. Mine's a 4.2. Of course, they're both Ferrari sourced. This has 433 horsepower to the roughly 400 in my car. 361 pound-feet of torque, which is also higher than mine. It weighs in at 4,387 pounds, which is just under 2 tons, which interestingly is heavier than mine, and that's not too surprising for a newer car. And here's the interesting thing, and this is the point that I said was important. The weight distribution is different, but it's different in the same way. And what I mean by that is both my Quattroporte and the one in the game stand relatively unique among the world of super saloons. and that is they have more weight over the back than the front. And that is highly unusual for a four-door car, because of course the engine's in the front, it's not all-wheel drive, so there's no extra weight there, so why on earth would you have more weight over the back? Well, the reason why is fairly simple. It was engineered that way. In a similar way to the SLR McLaren, the engine is placed as far back as it can possibly go, so although it's technically front engine, it's more front mid, or as close to that as a four-door car can be, which is the exact opposite of what, for instance, Audi liked to do with their RS4 at the time, which had really close to the front style engine placement. But the reason why I say that weight distribution is so important, in fact the key to this whole experience, is simple, and it leads nicely into the second score, and that is the realism. Does it feel and handle like the real car would? As I said, as close as a bunch of pixels in a game with a physics engine can, at least. Well, to some degree, this is where I'm going to have to give Forza 4 the benefit of the doubt for the moment, and I'm going to give it a score of 3. 3 out of 5, and you might be thinking, well, with the benefit of the doubt, that still seems like a pretty nasty score to give. It's fairly low, surely. Well, not really. It's close enough to a 50-50, and the reason why I'm giving it that is because I simply haven't driven the 2011 car. So although I have experienced a Quattroporte, it was 6 years older, so it is possible that it doesn't feel like my car. And the reason why I think that's probably the case is because of that weight distribution. See, the Quattroporte that's in the game has 51% of its weight over the back, 49% over the front. My car, on the other hand, from 2005, has 53% of the weight over the back, 47% over the front, which is even more rear inclined in terms of its weight distribution. And the reason why that's so important won't necessarily be readily apparent to many people who aren't, motorsport or otherwise racing fans. But the reason why that is so unique and also so important to a large, heavy four-door performance car is because it makes the Maserati Quattroporte in, I'm sure, this form, but definitely mine, have a totally unique handling signature. In fact, I would go so far as to say that my Quattroporte is without question the best handling car I've driven. And I've driven Mercedes, BMW, Volkswagen, Maserati, and even Porsche. And the Maserati was the best. And the reason why is because of that weight distribution. As soon as you start moving in the Quattroporte, and you don't even have to be pushing it that hard, I mean, of course you notice it more the faster you go, but even at normal speeds, it feels so light and so precise. The steering in particular is incredible on the Quattroporte, to the point where you can weave from left to right within a single lane, and it feels like you don't even have an engine in the front. It's that light. And despite the fact that that doesn't necessarily sound like a good thing, I mean, having a really light front end is often like a roof or Porsche problem, certainly in the older 911s, in the Quattroporte it really isn't, because a car that's that big, I mean, it's literally less than an inch shorter than a Mercedes S-Class, it's longer than my Touareg, it's a seriously big car, it weighs 2 tons, as I said, you don't have all-wheel drive to give you the extra traction, so you really are relying on that steering. Not just for performance, but even just for daily driving. And it just makes the car so much more precise and so much more maneuverable. And that is where the game does not do the car justice. But also, that is why I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt. Because the simple fact is, because the car in the game does not have the same weight distribution as mine. It is closer to a 50-50, and as such, it may well be duller to drive. It actually wouldn't surprise me if the 2011 has heavier steering than my car does. At the end of the day, it is closer to 50-50, so technically there is more weight over the front end, and it is a heavier car, around 30 or 40 kilos more. So it wouldn't surprise me if this is actually accurate to real life, and that's why I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt. Does it feel like mine? Absolutely not. Mine is the best handling car I've ever driven, even compared to the BMW i8, which sounds pretty insane, but trust me, that's true. To the point where I would say, if you get the chance ever to test drive or experience a Quattroporte like mine, take the opportunity. Even if you don't buy it, just take that chance to experience the handling of a car which you'll probably not experience anything else quite like. To have something so large, so long, and so heavy handle like it's got no weight at all is a remarkable feeling, and it really is a whole lot of fun. And that of course brings us to the final of the 3 scores. The fun factor. Despite the realism, despite the specs, no matter how good or how bad, does the game in question manage to elicit the kind of personality and character and fun? Does it put the smile on your face that the real car can? Or at least, as I said, as much as a game reasonably can? Well, to be generous, the simple answer is no. It's nowhere near as fun as my car, and as I've said before, there's no reason why a game cannot be as fun as your vehicle, as far as a game can be. The Touareg in Test Drive feels great, the Beamer in Forza feels great. They have their flaws, but they still really do get that personality across. In the case of this Maserati, it actually feels pretty underwhelming in the game. It feels borderline dull, in fact, and my Maserati was anything but dull, as I said earlier on. So again, I'm going to have to give it the benefit of the doubt, but even so, I have a hard time believing that Maserati would go from something as amazingly passionate as 2005 to being totally German and dull in 2011. I just don't see that happening. It's still Maserati, still a Ferrari engine, and it's still Italian, so for all of its flaws, all of that passion is surely still going to be there. So I'm still not going to ever think that the game is doing the best job of that, and of course I'll have to reserve that opinion fully for if I ever drive the 2011 car. But for now it means I'm going to have to give it a 3 out of 5, and again, that could well change in future if I revisit this episode. Ultimately, it does not feel anywhere near as fun or anywhere near as good as my car in real life did. And to those who are new to the series, that might sound like a ridiculous statement, but as I said, it can be done by a game. There are other games that I've played, a couple of which we've already looked at, which do an excellent job of getting as much of the car's personality and flavour into a virtual experience as they possibly can. This is not one of those occasions, so ultimately I'm going to have to give Forza 4's interpretation specifically of the Maserati Quattroporte a C. And of course reserve the right to change that score with a future revisiting of the Quattroporte, and I certainly hope that I get that chance because I would love to drive the 2011 car. Overall though, as I've said in the previous 2 episodes, this is a limited series. There are not going to be hundreds of episodes, at least for the moment, so any support that you can give to these videos is greatly appreciated. Watching the other 2, for instance, commenting on this one, giving it a like helps to increase its results in the search, and even, of course, something like a share to Facebook or showing it to a friend, whatever the case may be. But that's it for this installment. Of course, stick around on the channel next Monday for episode 4, in which we're actually going to something very, very different. Ride 3. But for now, that's it for this episode. I'll see you then, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.